I think Twitter After Dark is an innovative creation, like, for young folks. I think that it has demystified the idea of what sex is. Like, a lot of stuff that's on Twitter, or Twitter After Dark, however you want to call it, are amateur folks that do their own work, that like, are having these relations with people that they know, their homeboys, their homegirls, or whatever, somebody that they're frequently intimate with, and you get to see real sexual acts rather than something in a production or like somebody that's directing it.
You know I can't help but these, cause they know they can never touch these. So baby, let me talk my shit, or I might just throw another feed.
Wagwan, everybody. I am Donovan.
And I'm Constanza Eliana.
And welcome to Stranger Fruit. Today we're asking the question, are we oversexed? But before we do that, please hit that subscribe button, hit that notification bell so that you can keep up with us. All right, y'all. So we got to tell you why we decided to have this conversation in the first place. So it was during the panty, right? You know, I was single at the time. I found out about Twitter After Dark. I did not know that was a thing.
Oh,
okay.
Oh, did y'all know? It's a thing. It's a thing. It's a thing. So I'm excited to have y'all here with me because, you know, I'm not alone. So I was going through Twitter After Dark. First of all, I saw some familiar faces. I was like, a lot.
Oh, okay.
Oh, okay. All right, cool. I know you more intimately now. And not only that, and just so I can explain it for people who don't know what that is. So Twitter After Dark is where there's a lot of porn. People are able to make a lot of money now through things like OnlyFans, for example, and they use an avenue like Twitter, for example, to kind of like advertise their work, market their work, right? People are actually paying off their homes and their college degrees by doing this type of work. But what I did find the most interesting as I'm going through people's profiles are that like people have 200,000 followers, 160,000 followers, millions of followers. I was like, I'm late as hell to like the party. And I thought to myself, this is interesting because I remember when Netflix and Chill was the name of the game. And I was like, I didn't like it. I didn't like it because I felt like in trying to date, it became very much like
An expectation.
Yeah. It became transactional.
Yes.
It kind of defined what the date would be, right? Like the culture was around that. It was in our music, and a lot of people were just saying like, that's just the way that it is. Followed up by this more transactional aspect to sex that's in music. So if you listen to things like the City Girls or people who are just like, you ain't gonna get no pussy unless you have some coins or some dollars, like you gotta pay for this shit. And I was like, oh, this is interesting. Like, okay, all right, like, is this a bad or is this a good thing? But what I can say from a critical perspective was that I'm like, this has the potential to take us down a road where people are gonna be looking at sex as more transactional for sure, and that it's without the emotions or the emotional intelligence or, you know, if anybody wanted to be in a relationship, fucking good luck. Good luck. That's how I was feeling. So I really wanted to have this conversation for like years now.
Yeah.
Because all of a sudden it's 2023. So my first question, Dr. Donna, is, are we oversexed?
Probably not.
Okay.
I would say that the real question here is, are we undersexed?
Yeah.
Are we underpleasured? Are we not able to fully express ourselves in the way that we actually want to express ourselves? So I'm like, are we oversexed? Probably not. I think that it looks like it is.
Right.
I think that even the idea that sex is now becoming way more transactional, I'm like, actually, it's not. It's been what it has been for as long as people have been peopling.
Yeah.
But it's more visible now.
Exactly. We got the internet. You got Twitter After Dark.
I'm still on Twitter After Dark sometimes.
You got only.
So you have all these new avenues to be able to explore it and to explore it out loud in a way that maybe was not as acceptable way back in the day. But I mean, let's remember that the Kama Sutra is porn.
Yeah.
Let's remember that the Songs of Solomon, if you like to read your Bible, is also, I mean, it's porn, right? It's spiritual porn. So the idea of transactional sex and whether or not we're oversexed, I'm looking like, actually, I think that we are not as pleasure focused as we We're more pleasure focused now than we have ever been. And I think that that can only be a good thing. I think that the transactional part, I'm looking like people getting together because they love somebody, that is new. Transactional relationships have always been the thing.
Yeah,
That's
especially
great.
for
Thank you,
women,
Dr. Donna.
especially for women, right? Because women have always been the staple of men making different moves, political moves, financial moves, and it was always the daughters that were getting sold off to make those types of deals. And so it's always been the woman that has been at the center of the transaction because of sex, right? Because of the children that she's able to bear. So we are in a very interesting time where, yes, sex is a lot more visible. There's a lot of people complaining about, for instance, like billboards, like women are too naked on billboards and, you know, selling lingerie, right? Rihanna has her Fenty line. And people were complaining that, you know, you're showing too much, right? And it's over-sexualizing. So a part of the conversation too then centers around, like you said, is it sex or is it pleasure? And is it too much or is it too little? How do we find the balance?
There's a couple of things that we're conflating. One is sexual liberation is different than over-sexualizing or being sexually immoral as a nation, right? I'm all about being more sexually liberated in that we should all have pleasure. We should all be able to express ourselves in the way that we like. But here's a fun fact. There's actually a war tactic called subversion. Most Chinese students are now required to read The Art of War. In The Art of War, one of the things it says is if you want to cripple a nation, make their children sexually immoral.
Wow.
That is a war tactic because it destroys the family, and then you now have a generation, let's say these same kids 20 years later, we won't have any family structure. Therefore, your nation will actually be weakened. So do we want people to be more sexually liberated? We do. Is the over-sexualization and leading people down sexual immorality beneficial? No. That's going to eventually hurt us.
I love that point. But how would you define sexual immorality? Like, what does that mean to you?
Here's what I mean by that. I think that if you're in consensual relationships, you can do whatever you want. Get down how you get down. We're seeing, like you said now, a lot of transactional situations in which maybe both people don't agree that it's transactional, right? You have a lot of girls getting hurt because, oh, he flew me out and I didn't want to sleep with him and he kicked me out. So you didn't agree on the transaction. There's that. But then we also see a lot of infidelity. I can take your man, I can take your girl. People who are being introduced to kinks that didn't know about them, didn't want to be involved in it, didn't consent in that. So that's where it goes down the immorality lane. We don't judge anybody for what they like sexually, but we're seeing a lot more child trafficking. We're seeing a lot more pedophilia. They're trying to make pedophilia a sexuality.
Yes.
That's where we go down the lane of sex being a detriment to us rather than just expression.
Do you think that that's because of this new age that we're in? Because I kind of see it as like we had the Industrial Revolution, then we had the Information Age, and I kind of attribute this time that we're in now of like sexual liberation, and we're like in more understanding more about pleasure and what we like in bed and all these things, and seeing a lot more porn on the internet and in Twitter After Dark and things like that, which I think that it's a great thing that we're seeing because we're able to actually understand what we like and see different types of kinks and see, you know, that this isn't so taboo like it has been. But when you talk about sexual immorality, are you attributing this newfound visibility to that? Is that what you're saying? Because I kind of want to push back on that because it's like that has always been the case there, and unfortunately it has been like human trafficking, coercion, people are consenting to things, they're fuckboys and things of that nature that have always been the case. But now I feel like we have a lot more language to express what we like, what we dislike, and women, for example, have a lot more agency in their sexuality now, and not only women but queer folks as well. So
I'm glad you pushed back on that.
Okay, Charles. Okay.
Yeah, Charles, I'm glad you pushed back on that because I see it as two sides of the same coin, right? Like something, let's say, for example, if you eat a cheeseburger, it's great. If you eat 50 of them, you're going to get high blood pressure. I look at it that way, where the exposure is good for the liberation so that we can be more educated and there's less shame and less stigma. I think that's great, to your point. I think, Dr. Donna, you'd probably agree. I think the opposite side of that coin is where things are being praised that are hurting people. I think that's where it goes a little left for me.
Yeah.
So
I think
you know
I
what I
want to
mean?
know what you mean.
So what I mean by that is I'm all about people learning, let's say, for example, about different sexualities, different gender identities, different ways of expression, right? That's great. But opening the door to say, oh, I'm a pedophile, that's just my sexuality. I'm just attracted to children. That's just my,
people are.
that's what I like.
People are.
And that's fine.
And
But
there's
for us
nothing
to
wrong with
endorse
having
that
it.
is very sick.
I think that we can both, I think that oftentimes we get into a place of oversimplification, right? You can be attracted to whatever you're attracted to, and it doesn't mean that you're necessarily acting on that attraction, right? So there are people who are attracted to youngsters, who are attracted to teenagers, and given our fucking culture, let's be real, we made it so.
Yes.
We
very much so.
support it as such. We glorify the teenage body and the teenage mind, and we put it out front and center and say that this is the shit that everybody should want. So when people want it, then we say that there's a problem with the fact that they want it. I'm looking like Leonardo DiCaprio is trading these Johns every time they hit 25, happy birthday, get out my house, right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, and nobody's saying anything to him, right? Not really.
It's
I think
acceptable.
like he's like a baby butt of the joke,
Right.
Right? But I'm like, you can be attracted and not act on that attraction. And I think that what we forget is that there are a lot of people who do identify as being sexually attracted to minors who are not acting on that attraction.
But let's get deeper into this, Dr. Donna, because I think that there is a place of acknowledging that we're all, you know, there are a whole bunch of shit that people are into. Like, if you go down a rabbit hole, there are hands and fists in places, and there's a lot of things happening, and it is what it is. But when it does come to this kind of like Epstein infatuation with young folks, the history of this is that we come from people who literally would sail off their 13-year-old child or their 12-year-old or their 9-year-old to some grown-ass man.
Which still happens today.
Which still happens today. I think that, you know, it's really about protecting the children, right? Like that's what this really is about. How do we feel about the popularization of these spaces in the internet, for example, a la Andrew Tate, who we talk often about, who are able to kind of like use the fact that the internet does have these interesting spaces where people do, like they may not be the ones who are physically acting, right, against their pedophilia, you know, whatever they want to, let's say what they really desire. They may not be acting, but they can still access the content, in which case someone is providing them that content, in which case then it could be really problematic. So is it something where it should be like there's a hard stop, that stuff should not be available at all, it should be outlawed? Or do you feel like people should be allowed to have access to that content? Because for me, it's kind of like, I think that people should be able to see their kinks. They should be able to explore. I'm excited for sex workers who are able to get their coin. I'm over here like, shit, I might have to put on a little ski mask and bring it up because I have some debt to pay back. So I think like it's very alluring. But as I watch, you know, people make decisions in their early 20s or in their late teenage years, they're not thinking about what happens when I turn 28, and they're not thinking about what happens when I turn 30. They're not thinking about what happens when Twitter gets shut down and ain't no more Twitter on there anymore, which is kind of currently happening, or even with that moment with OnlyFans, where OnlyFans was going to discontinue the content. So essentially, we highlight these places, and then what happens when we do that? Like what do you think about that?
I have an example that maybe we can kind of work with too, is, you know, around the accessibility factor and quote unquote over-sexualization of young minors. There's a lot of divisiveness when you're talking about like baby pageants, for instance, right? We had an entire show dedicated to little kids, toddlers, and tiaras.
Yes.
And little kids doing pageantry. My mom put me in a pageant once. And so there's a lot of divisiveness there, because the parents will say, well, I allow my child to be a part of this because it's just play for them. They just like to dress up. They just like to do, you know, their talent. They like to show off. They like to perform. But a lot of people who have sinister things happening, and a lot of people who, like you said, are trying to keep that in, but when it's just them in their house, that's what they're watching. That's who they're being turned on by. So that can be kind of an example around this conversation of like, how do we feel about that? Because even in the music industry, the people who are becoming famous are less than 17 years old, probably.
That's
less
so
than
true.
18,
That's
right?
true.
Taylor Swift became famous at 13.
Yeah.
So how are we feeling about that type of accessibility for people?
I think it's scary.
you think it's scary.
Did you guys hear of Bad Baby made an OnlyFans that released on the day she turned 18?
Wow.
And she made $1 million in the first day.
American dollars, Nikki?
USD, my friend, meaning there were people that while you were between 13 and 17, which is when she became famous, salivating and waiting for that content, such that the first day you came out with it, they were ready. That's very concerning. Now, is she an adult and she can do that? Sure.
Now, would you call that her being sexually liberated, though? Because I think that's
100%.
what she would argue is, I'm 18 now, so I get to
I can
do what I want,
do.
and I want to
Yeah.
express
Absolutely,
myself.
and
And
she
a lot
can.
of teenagers will say that. I used to
And
say
they
that.
can. But then we hear people come back like Brittany Renner, who comes back years later and says, my soul is destroyed from doing this.
Exactly.
Oh, yes.
But
I think
so-
I know who you're talking about.
so-
Go ahead, Elijahdā.
I'm like conflicted on some of this because I think consent is what is at the base of it, and power, because again, just because someone may identify as a pedophile and they don't act on those things, these spaces that internet creates allows them to act on it passively, and that's still playing into that pedophilia. I think that's why when, even if you may not be with the child, but watching that video with the child legally, you've been a part of that chain, so you are legally held accountable for being a part of like child pornography and whatnot. So sometimes the internet creates spaces where, you know, oh, I wasn't with that young child, but you watched that 8-minute video.
Right.
And because you watched that 8-minute video, you are now part of this ring that took a child who doesn't have autonomy and against their will, because again, a child doesn't do that, but an adult recorded them or forced that child to do those acts, and you were part of that. So I think consent comes down into it too, but also the internet does, especially from a queer perspective, like the internet introduces you to sexuality and sex that you either were unaware of or did not know. Like as a young person who's intimate, you can also learn that, you know, young people think sex has to end with the money shot.
Yeah.
Sex has to be with the girl having her mascara come down, or sex has to be a man being so aggressive, where that oftentimes with straight women, women's pleasure isn't at the base of it.
Not at all.
Women are thought of as just human flesh jacks and toys for a man to get his nut and go on. But also, from a queer perspective, the person who's the bottom at that time, their pleasure isn't the point of the interaction either. So it's either giving the pleasure to a man, being overly aggressive or being overly dominated to the point where now the youth do not know what it means to be intimate, or doesn't know what it means to actually have proper sex where it's pleasure in both parts. So
I would say that we're having
Yeah.
multiple conversations
Okay.
at one time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? So like, I think of porn the same way I think of Fast and the Furious. All that shit is fake. You don't slingshot your car.
But people don't see it like that.
Yes,
Right.
people
They
don't
No,
see it
they
that
don't.
way. But that's a failing
And that's
of
the
the sex
problem.
education system, period. Right? Because if the only place to get your information is from porn,
Yes.
if that's the only place that we have allowed you to get their information, we have, as adults, we have failed.
100%.
And to your other point about like not acting on it, that watching a child who has been recorded, you are acting on it. So
yeah.
that's not what I mean. When I say not
Okay.
acting on it, I mean not acting on it.
Okay.
That for
Okay.
me, that does not count. And it doesn't count because you're right. That child did not consent to that. Isn't that the reason why Tiffany Haddish and somebody else came up
Right,
under fire because
right.
of what they did in that video,
Yes.
thinking that they were
Aries
making a
Spears.
joke, right? So I don't want us to. I feel like it's all coming together in a way where we're not properly separating, and I want to make sure that we are separating. Fast and the Furious is definitely fictional. You don't slingshot your car. Porn is just like Fast and the Furious. That is not how sex works. And the reason that it doesn't work like that is, well, number one, we're human beings. And number two is because in watching those type of things, and when we allow that to be the only space where kids can learn, where people can learn, then of course, now we're thinking, oh, well, sex is not good sex without the money shot. It's not good sex without the aggression. It's not good sex without these elements. But that's because adults have failed to have conversations because we are so fucking uncomfortable with children having sexuality. And the fact that they are sexual from birth till death, that needs to be a part of the conversation.
Yeah.
We are all sexual beings from birth until death. And as long as we continue to deny the sexuality of children, it means that in our adult bodies, Because the way they view their sexuality and the way we view sexuality is not the same.
different.
But as long as we continue to put our adult-minded sexuality onto children, we will never allow them to explore their own in a way that is healthy for them.
Yeah.
How many people have been told don't touch your genitals, right? Don't do that. That's nasty. Popped on the hand, popped on the butt. And now you've already learned that something about your sexuality, something about touching your body is shameful. What happens to those kids that you didn't talk to, that you called it their pocketbook, that you called it their purse? What happens now? What happens now is that you've actually opened the door for a predator to be like, let me see your pocketbook.
Yeah.
And when your kid comes and says, somebody saw my pocketbook, you have no idea what the fuck they mean.
Yeah.
Because we have decided that we are not going to have the fucking conversation. So are we oversexed? To get back to your original question, again, I'm saying probably not. I'm saying, but I will say that we are a nation of people who are fucking the way that we are and not having nary a goddamn conversation about it.
And before you jump in, everybody is consuming pornography, which means that everybody is being educated in some sort or entertained in some sort by pornography. And I think like that is one of the things that's the big elephant in the room, is that people shame sex workers, people say really, really bad things about sex. They don't want to teach their children about sex, but everybody's getting funneled into the same areas of the internet in order to get that type of education. And I do think that the responsibility does fall on people, but in certain ways, I do think that children and adults are alike when it comes to sex, in that it is something where the education comes from outside of your parents. So when I was young, as a queer person, right, like I can't go to my parents and talk to them about sex. It's not happening in any way, shape, or form. I hope that it's different now. I'm a big grown person, but in my experience in talking to younger people, it's not.
No.
So in where are they going? Twitter After Dark. And if you go on Twitter After Dark, I don't even watch certain videos because I don't see no mustache. I'm like, where your mustache at? How old are you? I don't know. And it makes, seriously, it makes me feel uncomfortable. So it's not only about the education, it's about who's also doing the entertaining. It gets very, very weird. It gets very, very murky. And I think that young people are getting the messaging that it's transactional because it's so concentrated in the music that I think that people are running and flocking to a space that has no parameters for it, let alone anybody there to protect them. So that's just a quick note. But go ahead, Kumoyo.
I was going to add that I think that with us, because most folks in this room right now, we're considered millennials. And I think that it would be important to listen to, like, as we're having this conversation, it sucks that we don't have a Gen Z here, or we don't have I'm sorry.
I'm about to say, come on now, don't play us. We got some.
Charles was like, hey.
I'm currently millennial.
I ain't as old as y'all motherfuckers.
But
didn't call it
I
a
would
thing
really
back
be
then.
interested in hearing the perspectives of high schoolers and seeing what they think about sex in this current day and age, because times have changed. And I don't know what it's like to want to have sex as a teenager in a pandemic or during, the recession or whatever we're going through currently right now. So I think that would be very important to listen, like Dr. Donna said, like we're not having conversations with the youth. There's this ageism thing where because I'm an adult, you're just going to have to listen to what I say. And we're not really listening as adults.
So Kumo, do you think that teenagers should be having sex?
I think because I was having sex at 14, and my aunt gave me condoms and was like, hey, go, like, you're gonna have sex. I know you're going to have sex. And I come from an African household, so that was like a bad thing to do. Like, if you have sex outside of marriage, you're a whore, you're not considered pure. So when my aunt introduced me to condoms, I was like, this is kind of weird. Like, why is she giving me condoms? Like,
Do you think she knew you were having sex?
she knew.
Oh, okay. Did you
She
tell
knew.
her?
I didn't tell her though.
But she knew.
So I think, there has to be, it's a very tricky place because, again, like, there's predators out there. I was fucking, like, older men. And
Like,
it's
how
like,
old?
Oh my
We
If you
all
were
8-year-old in our
I didn't ask for their name and social security number.
business.
I asked how old.
Give me social security number.
Like you, because you were 14. Like how old?
Okay, so 14, probably, like, okay, I would say, like, 16, 18. And then when I turned 16, I dated somebody, not dated, I was having sex with somebody who was 21 years old.
Okay.
So, you know, and I know for girls who grew up, like black girls, we're considered quote unquote fast because we do these things, right? So we know about sex, we know about masturbation, we know about experimenting with other girls. And I know I did that as a young girl. Like I was like, oh, I like coochie, cool. Like, you know, these were certain things that I wish that were talked to me about. Like, okay, why is this child hypersexual? Because I was such a hypersexual kid. I would hump fucking pillows and the couch.
Me too.
I think everyone was.
That doesn't sound like hypersexual. That just
I
sounds
don't know
like.
that I would label that as
Right.
Yeah,
Well,
yeah.
that's
You
were
Oh, that's
exploring
true. That's not
knowledge.
hyper. Yeah,
Sexy.
that's true.
So
Yeah.
horny.
Yeah,
You were
I mean,
exploring
you were a
yourself.
teenager.
See, I even like
Right.
that moment of reconciling that. Like, it's not a
Exactly.
bad thing. A lot of us felt that way.
I was taught that was bad. I was taught that that was evil. I used to literally pray, like, God, please take this sexual demon away from me, you
shit.
know?
Me too,
And
child.
so if it's like you're growing up in a church or you're growing up in a religious household and where they're teaching you that as a youth, like, sex is bad, it's like, then you start to look at it like, oh crap, like if I have sexual desires, like something's wrong with me, right? So I do think that we should have conversations with the youth because they know what the fuck is going on.
Exactly.
And they
we-
delay.
Exactly.
The onset of sex delays when you actually have a conversation. Now,
That's what I
granted,
was
the average
thinking.
age of having sex is 17. Like that's just period
okay,
across the
okay.
board. But in addition to that, when you're having the conversation, it takes some of the salaciousness out of it.
Yeah.
It
It
takes all the
does.
mystery out of it. I'm like, baby, suck all the mystery out. Let them know, like, this is why people have sex. Like, you know,
Yeah.
like when somebody wants to make a baby, I'm looking like, please.
Exactly.
That's not why most of us are having sex.
It's
We're
not why
having
most
sex
of us are
because
here.
It feels good,
Right.
right? Like we're having
Well-
sex because it feels good. And if we are too scared to talk about the pleasure aspect, then that means that we are going to continue to deny youth the ability to even explore themselves sexually. Babies have been known to masturbate in utero. We are not ready for that fucking conversation.
Not at
Well,
all.
before you go, Isaam, I want to bring in Charles because you said you're Gen Z. And so how does this conversation kind of fit into your generation's experience of that?
Yeah, I think there is a bit of a divide when Donovan, where you were talking about like your experience with Twitter After Dark and how it's like, oh, I don't know if I want to touch this or whatever. I'm like, no, I think Twitter After Dark is an innovative creation like for young folks. I think that it has demystified the idea of what sex is. Like a lot of stuff that's on Twitter or Twitter After Dark, however you want to call it, are amateur folks that do their own work that like are having these relations with people that they know, their homeboys, their homegirls, or whatever, somebody that they're frequently intimate with, and you get to see real sexual acts rather than something in a production or like somebody that's directing it. Even the conversations that I have with my younger loved ones, like they're enjoying their sexual experiences a lot more than I did when I was younger, and they know more about their bodies. They're more in tune with their bodies. They're more willing to let toxic partners go than I've seen before when I was younger. So I think that like, yes, there was a time, you know, when we were younger and when you were younger, you're saying that you felt shame, and I'm really sorry that you did feel that, because I had some inkling of that, but I did have parents that talked to me like, hey, sex is, you will feel good when you have sex. This is what happens when you're having sex. Like, you're gonna feel these little urges, and talk to me about porn, and told me that porn, this isn't really what it is. Sex is like, you can be intimate with somebody, you can like really, you know, go in deep with someone, not just, you know, physically, but, you know, mentally, spiritually,
So
all
that
of
was
these
your
things.
sex talk.
That was my sex talk.
Wow. Did
Yeah.
anyone
You have amazing
did
parents.
anyone have that same
You have amazing
experience?
Well, I want to,
No.
and I want to bring him
Because I
in
did
I was
time
gonna
in
get
too.
pregnant.
Yeah, exactly.
I was gonna say I'm glad that Charles had that experience, because that's
Yeah.
not everyone's
Yeah.
experience as
Not
a
at
child. I'm probably I don't know if maybe I'm the oldest one in here, but I'm old enough to have a child who is 19, and all of my female friends all have kids, and they are horrified about having conversations about sex. They're like wondering, when's the right age? I'm like, just talk about it.
Yeah.
Because things are happening to children
Right.
at 8 that they should know about.
Yeah.
Right.
So when you talk about the kids nowadays they're being raised by those people who are still afraid, who haven't even found their own sexual liberation.
Exactly.
And so they aren't comfortable having those conversations. So I'm wondering what the generation behind that would look like, being raised in a oversexed community
Their
where
worlds
everything
ahead.
is so free. Because even though it's free, it is the scales don't seem balanced.
Right.
They seem to
What do
tip.
you mean by scales don't seem balanced?
There is a part of me, because I'm a different generation. So like, I wasn't raised with sex all over TV, right? I wasn't raised with the internet. I had to dial up.
Yeah, right.
that was the whole
So,
thing.
you had to go buy porn at a store.
Right.
Yes.
It wasn't at my
And
fingertips.
it didn't even come in DVD.
Yeah, it was
it
in
had
the
to
back.
come in
It
a
was like,
tape.
yeah.
Oh my God.
So
Yes.
like,
In the back,
it's
and they
a
check the
different
ID.
experience
Yeah,
for
it was.
me to see, everything out there like that. Like even Twitter After Dark, like I know Twitter After Dark. I normally ask the guy, what's your Twitter? Because I want to see if you're a part of Twitter
That's
After
fair.
Dark, because I'm during Twitter during the day
Yeah.
and only at night.
No, you
by
should get
myself.
into it at night.
That autosexual stuff, right? So it's very different. So I'm really curious as to what that's gonna look like 10 years from now for the
Right.
kid who's then, because nowadays kids are still I work in public health, so I do HIV testing.
Okay.
I still have 18-year-olds coming in testing positive because they have no one to talk to about their sexuality.
Wow.
Male, female, queer, non, everybody's still coming in testing positive because there is no one to talk to. The resources that they have don't really exist. And they're just finding spaces to be free, but no direction
Exactly.
in that. And so that's when it becomes, to me,
I got you.
the scales tip,
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really great point, Isaam, because it's not only about, and this is where we can go with the conversation, is that it's not only about sex, right? Like
Right.
it's just a portion of it. It's a portion of it, and that's why I did mention transactional at the beginning of the conversation, because a lot of times the conversation starts and ends at sex, like physically, literally, and every other way, before you may even get ghosted, okay? And HIV is kind of like a consequence for certain types of, like, if you're not using protection, for example, or ignorance, whatever the case is. As someone who is HIV positive, I'll also say that, like, for me, even though I was super, super, super careful, the reason why I wound up in that situation was because I trusted someone that I should not have. And it wasn't because I did not know how to have sex, it was because I did not know about the other stuff around sex, which is how and who should you be having sex with? What is the energy that you're exchanging with each other when you are in fact having sex? Does it matter? What happens after you get that diagnosis? What happens after you get that baby? What happens after real life consequences happens as a result of sex? So it doesn't begin and end there. This was a very, very energetic, enriching conversation. Thank you, Dr. Donna. Thank you, Isaam. Thank you, Charles. Thank you, Kumo. Thank you, Nikki. Thank you, Elijahdā. Eliana, you are dope. The best co-host in the world. Thank you for everyone at home for watching. Once again, be sure to subscribe, hit that notification bell, tell your friend to tell a friend to come check this out. And more than anything, let us know how you feel about this topic in the comment section. And we will see you next time. Peace. Hookup culture does not have the nuance to take care of you and your sweetness and your needs. That's not what it is.
No,
so
not at all.
So get that out of your mind. It's not a thing. Hookup culture does not care about you wanting to get rimmed or wanting to get your. I'll tell you what I have to do to get you in a room to do whatever it is that we're
Right.
supposed to do. People don't give a fuck. So
No.
let's just dispel that myth.